The Las Vegas Raiders have officially hired their head coach in Pete Carroll, and today we're going to talk about what this guy brings to the Las Vegas Raiders. I'm excited for this one, man. I think Pete Carroll is a very, very solid coach. You're bringing in a guy that has proven he's a winner in the NFL, and you're bringing him into a team where we don't really have a clear direction on the offense side of the football. And I think for the Raiders, this is a really, really solid hire. Adam Schefter put it out there that Pete Carroll and the Las Vegas Raiders had reached an agreement on a 3-year deal with the 4th-year team option, right? So this contract could be 4 years. And to me, one of the things I think about with a guy like Pete Carroll is how Pete Carroll came into the NFL, and for 2 years, the Seahawks kind of struggled a little bit. They got themselves Russell Wilson, and they stuck with Russell Wilson as well. And year 3, this guy's in the playoffs. Year 4, he's winning a Super Bowl. And then basically for like a 4 or 5 year period, this guy had the #1 defense in the NFL, which you don't generally have, right? And Pete Carroll has done a really, really good job not only being able to have success, but he's done a really good job finding coordinators and kind of bringing them in. Dan Quinn, Robert Saleh, Lane Kiffin, Steve Sarkisian are guys that Pete Carroll had ultimately brought in and hired, right? And these are some of the best coaches on planet Earth, essentially, right? Because they're all at the top of some of the programs, kind of around the country. So to me, Pete Carroll is a very, very solid coach. And for the Raiders, this kind of puts us on track to actually have success. One of the things that we have to realize with the Raiders is we haven't had a lot of success over the past 20 years. We haven't had a lot of success over the past 20 years. We haven't won a playoff game, and we've barely made the playoffs a couple of times in that time frame. Chances are in the next 4 to 5 years, we'll actually be competing and we'll actually be a good football team going forward. Chances are in the next 2 to 3 years, with Pete Carroll as the Raiders coach, we'll actually make the playoffs and we'll actually play meaningful games come January and December, right? Like in those 2 months, we've almost never had meaningful games over the past 5 or 6 years. Going forward, we will actually have meaningful games. And that's the one thing that really excites me with a guy like Pete Carroll. This guy's proven to be a winner. He's proven to have success. He's proven to turn programs around that may not be having success. And he's a Super Bowl winning coach at the end of the day. And I think for the Raiders, is a very, very solid hire. Now, some people are worried. He's 73 years old. He's one of the oldest coaches. If not, he might be the oldest coach in the NFL at the moment. But to me, 73 isn't super, super old. I think you can be very sharp. And with Pete Carroll, we've obviously seen this guy's very sharp. Even in the last year that he was coaching, he was still a really good coach. And he had essentially helped turn Geno Smith's NFL career around, which is another thing that I kind of want to talk about a little bit. Because the Raiders don't have a quarterback, right? Let's just be 100% honest. Ben Johnson did not take the Raiders' job because we did not have a quarterback. Liam Cohn, when the Raiders reached out, said, I'm good. I am not interested in the Raiders' job. And the reason why is because we don't have a quarterback. Other coordinators that we had reached out to said, we are good. You don't have a quarterback. It's not the type of job that we really want. Last year when the Raiders went with Antonio Pierce, the coordinators that were available did not want to come to the Raiders, right? So this year, the Raiders continue to struggle with the fact that they don't really have a quarterback. But for some coaches like Pete Carroll, that might not actually matter because he might feel confident that, hey, I will find a quarterback, right? I will be able to kind of make that happen. He was one of the reasons why a guy like Geno Smith was able to turn his career around. Russell Wilson had a really, really good career as well. When I think about a guy like Pete Carroll, I think about a guy that can bring in quarterbacks that other teams may have written off or quarterbacks that may not have had a lot of success. And he may be able to kind of bring them in and help save them. Some people give credit to Dave Canales, who is the current head coach of the Carolina Panthers. He was the quarterbacks coach of the Seahawks at that time with Pete Carroll when Geno Smith was initially brought over. And some people think it was Dave Canales that helped Geno Smith kind of get back to form. I disagree with that. I think usually it's on a head coach and the play caller to kind of get the quarterback right? The quarterback's coach, the quarterback's coach's job changes from team to team, right? It's not really a fixed position. It's really just a title. But the fact that Pete Carroll was able to bring in a guy like Geno Smith, who pretty much every team had kind of written off, and he was able to have success tells me that Pete Carroll might be able to turn and kind of find a quarterback that he can potentially mold and have the Raiders have success. Another thing we got to realize is Pete Carroll's a defensive guy, right? Pete Carroll led the #1 defense for multiple years with the Seattle Seahawks, the Legion of Boom, right? He had the #1 defense, I think, for 4 straight years. And then even the year before that 4-year period and the year after, it was still a top 10 defense, right? The Seattle Seahawks defense under Pete Carroll dominated. And Most recently, the defense wasn't as good, but I think the Seahawks had kind of shifted away from being a defensive first team to an offensive first team. They went all in on some of the offensive guys that they had drafted over the past like 4 or 5 years. And then on top of that, you make some big contracts on the offensive side. The defense gets a little bit younger. But the offense started carrying the Seahawks, right? And Geno Smith was obviously a big part of that. So I think for the Raiders to go forward, you might be able to go out there and say, hey, can Jameis Winston, can he get those turnovers under control? And can you win with Jameis Winston? Can you find Justin Fields and potentially mold him into the quarterback you want? Or Gardner Minshew or Aiden O'Connell? Can Pete Carroll trust that these guys can kind of come in and have success? And truth be told, there's not a lot of coaches that you're going to trust more than Pete Carroll. All right, Pete Carroll will go out there, he'll hire, Clay Kubiak or, Bobby Slowick's little brother. I don't know what his name is, but that's Slowick, right? Like, he'll find one of these guys, bring them in, mold them to be a good coach. They'll help whoever that next quarterback is. And the Raiders are going to build a winning program, right? And I think for me, that's the most exciting part of Pete Carroll as we kind of go forward. Pete Carroll is shown to have success. Now, some people will actually say this is a bad hire. I disagree with that. I don't think Pete Carroll is necessarily a bad hire. I think he's a guy that's proven to win. He's a guy that's proven to have success. And when you think about the Raiders, right, we haven't had a lot of success for 20 years. I think we haven't had consistency as well. And I think for the next 3 years, Pete Carroll's going to be our coach. Even if we win 2 games next year and 2 games the year after, Pete Carroll will have that third year. I think the Raiders are going to try to change that narrative that they're firing coaches every other year, which we pretty much have been for 3 straight years at this point. We're going to change that narrative of, we don't have a general manager in place for a 10-year span to kind of do his thing. I think we will now with John Spytek. And I also think the Raiders are going to try to be more consistent as we go forward, right? You got to have that continuity, which is something John Spytek had talked about in the past. I broke that down in the video yesterday. If you guys did not watch that video, go check it out. Basically, John Spytek had like an interview that he had done, and we took clips out of that interview where he talked about how he kind of approaches building a roster, building a team. He talked about how important it is to have a head coach in place for a number of years, having a scouting staff in place for a number of years, the front office in place for a number of years. And I think for the Raiders, that's something we've been kind of missing. And I think with Pete Carroll, that helps to do that on the coaching side. And then, of course, with Spytek and Tom Brady kind of at the top, hopefully we can do that in the front office side as well. One of the things the Raiders can have to get right is the quarterback position, but we'll also have to get a couple other positions right? So Pete Carroll will figure out what the quarterback position looks like as we go forward. We'll also have to figure out the running back position. The offensive line is going to be a huge part of this as we kind of go forward as well. And then I think the defense side of the football for the Raiders is very solid. We'll have to bring some of our guys back. We'll have to replace some guys that we don't pay. And I trust Pete Carroll to get it right? I think Pete Carroll is one of those guys that can absolutely build it out and allow the Raiders to have success. And the fact that this guy's had a really good defense in the past, and the Raiders have some good pieces in Maxx and Christian and some of these other guys, I'm not worried about the defensive side at all. The thing that Pete Carroll will have to do outside the quarterback on the offensive side is he's going to have to get a true number 1 wide receiver. The Seahawks have drafted wide receivers fairly high with guys like Jackson Smith and Jigba. They drafted DK Metcalf. And to me, the fact that the Seahawks have done that in the past tells me that Pete Carroll's going to want to kind of do that again. And I think for the Raiders, it is important to make sure we get a number 1 wide receiver. Jacoby Myers is a great number 2. Trey Tucker's a solid slot / influence guy, right? And then, of course, we have Brock Bowers and Michael Mayer. Phenomenal offense with those guys right there, but we need a true X wide receiver. And to me, that's going to be the one thing that we're going to have to get right. I think it's a lot more important to get that right with the 6th overall pick than it is the running back position, right? I think with the running back position, you can potentially take a guy in the 2nd or 3rd round, still get a really good running back. And Pete Carroll's done that, right? Like just over the last 5 years, he's taken 2 running backs in back-to-back drafts. I think in the first year, he took one in the 3rd round. And then the year after, he took one in the 2nd round. So to me, I think the Raiders will end up getting some running backs that can have success. Now, the one thing I will worry with Pete Carroll is with the Seahawks, he didn't really value offensive linemen and investing in the offensive line. So I worry if the Raiders are going to take that same approach here because especially over the last 2 years, the Seahawks offensive line had fallen apart. 3 years ago, the Seahawks had an absolute dominant offensive line. They had Gabe Jackson at right guard. They had Damian Lewis at left guard. They had they had good center. They had some good tackles. The year after, they spent the 7th overall pick on Charles Cross, really solid left tackle. They got Abraham Lucas, who's an absolute steal in the 3rd round, really solid. Damian Lewis, Phil Haynes, I forget the center's name, but they had some good offensive linemen, and they decided not to bring some of these guys back. They have a little bit of injuries, and it's just been bad for the offensive line, right? And maybe injuries was part of that, but the Raiders are going to have to fix their offensive line as well. I know some people think the Raiders have a good offensive line. I disagree with it. I think the Raiders offensive line has to get shored up. I'm not sure with the right tackle yet, right? We don't really know if DJ Glaze is the guy. At the same time, I think we need to bring in one guard, right? At least this year. We got to bring in one guard. I think we need to upgrade as much as possible, and we need to get some bullies up front. Paris Johnson's a great guy to have, but we need a bully at that guard position, and hopefully Pete Carroll's able to kind of get that out of the draft. John Spytek, in the video yesterday, we talked about it, kind of values guys on the bigger side, right? Barton, the center they drafted was 6'5". The guard they drafted was 6'4". So he obviously values guys with size. So hopefully Pete Carroll's kind of, be able to kind of get that right for the Raiders to kind of go forward. Overall, I like the hire, man. I know some people are going to disagree with it. The age factor. He's not an offensive play caller. But again, we do have to realize that Ben Johnson and Liam Cohn, I'll tell you guys a quick story. Back in 2020, 2021, there were a couple of good coaches that were in the hiring process. And the Bears had requested to hire these guys. I think Dan Campbell was one and Nick Sirianni was the other. Both guys turned down the Bears job. Now, this was not public information, right? It wasn't like they put a slip in for these guys, but they reached out and they asked to interview these guys. And both guys said, we're good. You guys don't have a quarterback. You don't have a clear direction. You're firing your head coach every other year. The Bears job is a really, really bad job. The Bears decided we're going to go ahead and roll forward with Justin Fields. They said we're going to build this out over the next couple of years. And their general manager, Ryan Poles, kind of did that, right? They built it out. They went forward with Justin Fields, although they probably felt he wasn't a great quarterback. They went forward with it because they said that we want to build the roster out. They trimmed down first. They got rid of guys like Roquan Smith. They traded a couple of their offensive linemen. And they just started building through their draft where they hit on multiple guys. First, second round were solid picks pretty much every year. And they're at the point now where not only do they have the quarterback, which they got last year, but now they have a great young head coach. There's a chance the Bears for the next 10 years are going to be in the playoffs every year. There's a good chance, in fact, that's going to happen. And I think with the Raiders, one of the things we got to look forward to is for Pete Carroll to get us on the right path. And hopefully, even if we don't win a Super Bowl in the next 3 or 4 years, hopefully in year 3 or 4, this team's on the right path. We have a quarterback in place, whether that's a rookie or maybe it's a veteran who's in like year 6 or 7 of his NFL career. As long as we kind of have that, and if Pete Carroll doesn't work out, as long as we have consistency, we can always make that change at that point and say, let's get Clint Kubiak, who's the next Ben Johnson, right? Or the, younger Slowick, and he's the next Ben Johnson. Or maybe even it's Bobby Slowick, or who knows, right? I think at some point the Raiders are going to have to, not have to, but I think at some point the Raiders will actually turn this into a winning program. And I think Pete Carroll is a really good hire to get us on that right path. You guys know this. I never agreed with Antonio Pierce as the head coach. Never agreed with it. I posted this multiple times on Twitter. I made multiple videos on Twitter talking about this. I would have preferred Harbaugh. I would have preferred, obviously, Bobby Slowick or even Ben Johnson at that point. But those 2 guys ended up going back to their teams. They obviously did not want to be with the Raiders, which is why they went back to their teams. But more than them going back to their teams, right? I did not want AP, right? I did not want him. And it wasn't because I don't like AP. I think he's a really, really good coach. He has a lot of potential. But he had never proven himself as a head coach. And I know sometimes that works, but most of the time it doesn't. And he also did not call plays. And with Pete Carroll, although Pete Carroll doesn't also call plays, Pete Carroll has proven himself that he doesn't have to call plays and he can have success. He's proven it multiple times. He builds a culture and he's proven that he can build a culture. Same thing with Harbaugh. All right. He doesn't call plays, but he builds a culture. And for the Chargers, they're in the playoffs. First year under Harbaugh. I think there's a good chance Pete Carroll builds this out right. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. And I'll see you guys next time with another video.